Oh, gaming lore, if I spent half the time reading the Bible as I did reading you, I'd have memorized it by now. And I could go toe-to-toe with any evangelical minister. Okay, maybe his 5-year-old. Anyway, for the story nerd in each of us, gaming lore will always be the siren song that can immerse us even in the most dreadful game. But for all the imagination, gorgeous vistas, and the huge amount of work put in, there are some elements in gaming lore that are a bit lacking. Specifically, what I'm referring to is, surprise surprise, religious lore in gaming. And it's unfortunate too, because despite reams and reams of religious history in games, there isn't a whole lot of actual religion going on. If there's one thing that strikes me immediately about religious lore in games, is that the lore itself seems really disconnected from any real religious significance. To be sure, there are a lot of stories involving people who are significant to the religion in the gaming lore. In some respects, there's too much information. But at the end of the day, the significance of the history when it comes to religious tenets of faith is mysteriously absent. What's even more confusing is that sometimes it's hard to delineate what is important to the doctrine of the religion via religious lore and the non-doctrinal history of the religion in question. It all seems a mishmash of events that seem to have little to do with each other, and the emphasis placed on certain events, while perhaps significant to the story of the game, seem to have no connection to the religion in question other than the people who adhere to the religion. So why is it that religious lore feels so flat in games? Why is so much effort poured into the lore of a world that tries to infuse a religion into it seem like a facade? What is it about the construction of the lore in games that robs the religious aspects of significance? Moral depth. In keeping with our theme for the last few videos, it's only right to point out that the first major thing that is missing from religious lore in games is anything resembling moral teaching. Very few, if any, games with made-up religions take the time to illustrate how the teachings of the religion communicate any information about morality. While it varies from one religion to another, the most direct reason people embrace religious systems of thought is because they provide moral instruction. Religions provide a collective moral thinking that often is a deposit of life experiences for those who came before us. It provides a window into the past to show how people viewed humanity and its ultimate destination. Now, to be sure, the religious lore in a lot of religions contain a mixture of moral instruction, cultural customs, political thought, etc., etc. And often religions have an interpretive context to sort the moral details from the rest. But at the end of the day, one of the primary reasons for religious to explore the religious lore of their faiths is to learn about themselves and how to relate to each other. And that's what morality is in a nutshell. This is one of the first things I notice when reading lore in games that deals with religious elements. Aside from some arbitrary relationship definitions between classes of people, there's very little moral instruction in gaming lore. It's as if the religious lore simply adds a bunch of elements to the world's history without attempting to draw a larger point. It kinda just hangs there. Like the ugly pear on a tree you don't want to pick, but resent the fact that you keep looking at it. Yeah, I have no idea where I was going with this. Symbolism. Dovetailing on my last point, there's a remarkable lack of symbolism in religious lore. Religious elements are presented in very matter-of-fact ways, lacking any sense of poetry or aesthetic. It's like the most boring history course ever. And that last point is just as blunt an assertion as anything you'd encounter in religious lore in games. The elements in religious lore serve not only to instruct about the past, but to symbolize the truths about the religion in question. The events in sacred stories, or what they were called in the past, myth, would tell stories that speak to the history of the faith. These events also put truths about the religion in ways that are more easily grasped. To take a totally random example, one can point to the parables of Jesus of Nazareth in the New Testament. Each of those parables is loaded with meaning. From the prodigal son to the king of the three stewards, the depth of the parables show a story that is not only relatable to the hearers, but points to truths beyond what is told in the narratives. Now, to be clear, I don't think developers need to create such depth in their lore as real religions have. I mean, I think Catholicism is true, so as far as I'm concerned, it's impossible to imitate. But developers should ask themselves if the lore for their religion develops the narrative in-game, or is simply fluff that seems to pad the history. In religious lore, the history is both an account of the people of the religion, and also through that history teaches the deeper truths of the religion. It's actually a model of efficient communication. One book of the Bible says more about the religion of Christianity than the entirety of some lore in games. Except for maybe the Book of Numbers. Still have no idea what that's about. Mysticism. This topic isn't so much concerned about what developers could do to improve the digital religions. Rather, like when we covered real morality, this topic covers why any medium's religious lore will not be able to emulate real religious lore completely. Perhaps the most intangible aspect of religious lore is that within the sacred stories lies an infinite depth for people to continuously explore. From historical knowledge to moral teaching, the sacred stories touch the lives of people in different ways. The reading of these stories time and again often reveals things that aren't apparent on first pass. Now, this may sound like I'm repeating myself, but let me explain. When we read a book or watch a good movie, a particular impression is left on our minds depending upon how we perceive it. Very good media can reveal more things on multiple viewings or readings. This is nothing new. But from the beginning, the sacred stories reveal things no matter how many times they are read or heard, and different people across different times and cultures all perceive new information about these stories. People to this day discover new things regardless of their education or cultural background. And this extends into activities like praying over the stories, memorizing parts for the purposes of hymns or mantras. The, again repeating myself, endless wellspring of ideas and depth of teaching put these stories above any other literature or media. Good luck trying to emulate that, eager young developer. But the point of mentioning this is not to discourage developers from trying to add religious elements to their games. Rather, it's an attempt to get developers to understand the scope of their undertaking and understand the limitations of what can be accomplished. Finally, the biggest reason is to show why the religious elements in games are so limited at the moment. See, here's the thing. When I read religious lore or encounter religious people in games, I can't get into why anyone would follow such shallow religious thinking. The religious lore in games is a stereotype that portrays a fundamental lack of knowledge of religious lore's appeal and the followers of such. It says more about the developer's lack of knowledge than any actual commentary on religion. At the end of the day, the art is only as good as the effort put in to represent the real thing. A shallow religion in art says little about real religion, but says a lot more about the artist. And as I stated before, even those trying to be fair to religious elements seem to lack a fundamental understanding about the appeal of religion, and the lore reflects that. And finally, as I always say, this is not about the actual moral character of the people who create such media. My only interest is improving the quality of these elements in games. Shallow religions in games show a lack of understanding of religious people and motivations, and gaming lore too often reflects that. That's all for now. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.